If someone had told me a year ago that my life, my carefully constructed world of silent paper and faded ink, would be irrevocably altered by a burst pipe and the man from apartment 4B, I would have returned to my bookbinding press without a word. My world was one of order. It was a universe measured in millimeters, in the precise thickness of archival board and the delicate weight of Japanese tissue paper. My apartment was a sanctuary, a library, a workshop. The air smelled of old leather and PVA glue, a scent I found more comforting than any perfume. My name is Leo, and I mend broken things. Not people, never people, just books. Books are logical. Their spines can be re-sewn, their pages deacidified, their stories preserved. They don't talk back. They don't have unpredictable emotions. They don't move into the apartment across the hall and shatter the sacred quiet with the thud of heavy boots and the low rumble of a voice that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. He was Julian. I knew his name from the little card slotted beside his door. Julian Vance. Even his name sounded solid, grounded. An anchor in a world I preferred to float through, unnoticed. From a distance, he was a collection of loud noises and fleeting impressions. The slam of a truck door in the early morning. The scent of sawdust and something sharp, like turpentine, that clung to the hallway air after he passed. The silhouette of broad shoulders I'd see through my peephole, a mountain of a man who seemed to take up more than his share of space in the world. He was confident, or maybe it was arrogance. The way he walked, a long, purposeful stride that ate up the hallway. The way he never seemed to look down. He occupied his space with an unapologetic physicality that I, in my quiet, shuffling existence, found both terrifying and mesmerizing. I saw him as an antagonist to my peace, a disruption, a loud, lumbering fact I had to navigate around. Our interactions were a minimalist play acted out in the narrow theater of our shared hallway. A curt nod from me, my eyes fixed on the scuff marks on the floor. Sometimes a low, gravelly, mourning from him, a sound that always seemed to startle a flock of birds in my chest. I never replied with more than a twitch of my lips that I hoped passed for a smile. The distance between us was the width of a hallway carpet, but it felt like a chasm. He was the sun, loud and bright and impossible to ignore. I was a creature of the shade, content in my curated dimness, a professional hierarchy of existence. He was out there, building things, wrestling with the physical world. I was in here, preserving it, whispering to ghosts through the pages of forgotten novels. We were oil and water, a carpenter and a librarian of sorts. There was no reason for our worlds to ever truly touch, and I was perfectly, utterly content with that. Or so I told myself, every time I found myself lingering at my door, listening for the jingle of his keys. The routine was my armor. Wake at 6, tea and toast. Work at my bench from 7 until noon. A simple lunch. More work until 5. Then reading, quiet, blessed reading, until my eyes grew heavy. It was a life built like a fortress, wall by careful wall, to keep the chaos of the world out. Then the chaos found a crack in the plumbing. It started as a drip, a rumor of water somewhere it shouldn't be. Then it became a stain on the hallway ceiling, a weeping brown map of some unknown territory. I watched it grow for a day, a passive observer to the building's slow decay. Then came the shouting, and the sound of rushing water. Not a drip, but a roar. I cracked my door open. The hallway was a mess. Water was pouring from the ceiling directly in front of Julian's apartment, cascading down his door. Mr. Henderson, the superintendent, was there looking panicked. And Julian was standing there, soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, staring at the waterfall destroying his welcome mat as if it were a personal insult. The main pipe on this floor, Mr. Henderson was yelling over the noise. Burst right over your unit. We have to shut off the water to the whole building. My first thought, a selfish, shameful little worm of a thought, was for my books. My workshop. Was my apartment safe? My second thought was of him, standing there, water dripping from his chin, looking less like an immovable mountain and more like a man watching his home drown. The water was shut off. The roar subsided to a miserable, steady dripping. But the damage was done. I heard Mr. Henderson talking to him in a low, grim voice. "It's bad, son. The ceiling's collapsed in your living room. It's going to be a few days, at least. You got somewhere to go." A pause. I strained to hear Julian's reply, my ear pressed to the cool wood of my door. "No, not really. I'll figure it out. A hotel, or something." His voice was flat, devoid of its usual booming confidence. It was just tired. And that's when Mr. Henderson's eyes, scanning the hallway in desperation, landed on my door. On the sliver of light showing I was home. He knew I was quiet. He knew I worked from home. He knew I was a pushover. A knock. 3 sharp raps that felt like cannon shots against the hull of my carefully built ship. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Don't answer. Pretend you're not here. Pretend you're deaf. Pretend you've spontaneously ceased to exist." But I opened the door. "Leo," Mr. Henderson said, his relief palpable. "Thank goodness. Look, I've got a hell of a situation here. Julian's place is flooded out. Uninhabitable. It'll be 2, maybe 3 nights before it's sorted. I know it's a huge ask, but could he maybe use your couch?" He gestured behind him. Julian stood there, still damp, his hands shoved in his pockets. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, his jaw tight. For the first time, he looked embarrassed, unsure. The arrogance I had projected onto him evaporated under the harsh fluorescent hallway lights, leaving behind something far more complicated. My mouth was dry. My fortress was being boarded. The world, in the form of my 6'3" sawdust-scented neighbor, was asking to be let in. Every instinct screamed, "No, no, this is my space. No, I need my quiet. No, I can't handle this disruption." But the word that came out of my mouth, small and thin, was yes, yes. Of course. He finally looked at me then. His eyes were a startling shade of green, like moss in a deep forest. I'd never been close enough to see them before. They were guarded, but there was a flicker of something else in them. Gratitude. And it undid me completely. And just like that, the barrier was breached. The stranger was inside. The first hour was an exercise in excruciating awkwardness. He stood in the middle of my living room, which was also my workshop, dripping onto a small rug-eyed salvage from an estate sale. He seemed enormous in the enclosed space, a giant in a doll's house. He held a single duffel bag, his entire life, for the next few days, contained in a worn canvas sack. I don't want to be in your way," he said, and the sound of his voice, not bouncing off the hard surfaces of the hallway, but absorbed by my books and tapestries, was different, softer. "It's fine," I mumbled, not looking at him, busying myself by clearing a stack of 19th century poetry off the sofa. "The couch is..." A couch, a brilliant observation. I could feel my cheeks burning. He brought with him the smell of the outdoors. Rain, wet earth, sawdust. It was a stark contrast to the dry, papery scent of my life. He was a living thing in my museum. He moved with a careful slowness, as if afraid he might break something. He placed his bag by the door and stood there, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, waiting for direction. This titan of a man, who I'd imagined strode through the world without a care, was waiting for permission from me. The power dynamic I had invented, the one where he was the confident aggressor and I was the timid mouse, crumbled to dust. "Showers down the hall," I offered, pointing. "Towels are in a cabinet." He gave a small nod and disappeared. I was left alone with the silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a silence with a hole in it, a space that was waiting to be filled by his return. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. What have I done? When he came back, the apartment was filled with the scent of my soap. A simple, unscented oatmeal soap. On him, it smelled entirely different. He was wearing a soft gray t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was damp and curling slightly at the ends. Without the armor of his work boots and jacket, he looked younger, softer. He didn't sit. He wandered. He drifted through my workshop, his eyes scanning the shelves, the tools, the presses. He didn't touch anything. He just looked. His gaze was intense, curious. He stopped in front of my main workbench, where a dilapidated copy of Moby Dick lay in pieces, its spine carefully dissected, its pages waiting for mending. "This is what you do?" he asked, his voice low. "I restore old books," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I felt suddenly exposed, my quiet passion laid bare for his inspection. I expected a joke, or maybe just polite disinterest. "You fix them," he said, more to himself than to me. He leaned closer, his head tilted, and I saw it, a long, silver scar that ran from his temple into his hairline, almost hidden by his damp hair. I never noticed it. It was a flaw, a mark of some past violence or accident, on this person I had perceived as so indestructible. He pointed a finger, hovering it just over a torn page. His hands. I'd seen them from afar, carrying lumber, gripping tools. Up close, I saw they were a roadmap of his life. Calloused and scarred, the knuckles nicked and scabbed in places. But his fingers were long and surprisingly elegant. There was a story in those hands. "How do you even start?" he asked, his genuine curiosity a surprise. I found myself explaining, talking about paper pulp and rice starch paste, about sewing signatures and tooling leather. The words, usually trapped inside me, flowed out. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched my face, his green eyes reflecting the dim light of my workshop lamp. He was tired. I could see it in the slight slump of his shoulders, the faint purple smudges beneath his eyes. The confident swagger from the hallway was a performance. I realized this was something closer to the truth. A man, weary to his bones, displaced and uncertain. An unexpected kindness bloomed in my chest, a dangerous, unfamiliar feeling. Later that night, I was trying to move a heavy wooden crate filled with uncut paper stock. It was wedged in a corner, and I needed to get behind it. I was grunting, pushing, my feet slipping on the floorboards. It was hopeless. Here, his voice was right behind me. I jumped, startled. He'd moved so quietly. He was standing there, watching me struggle. "I've got it," I said too quickly. The lie was pathetic. He ignored me. He simply bent down, his hands finding purchase on the sides of the crate. "On 3, he said. "Just guide it 1, 2, 3" He lifted, and I pulled. The crate, which had felt bolted to the floor, slid out with an ease that was almost comical. As it moved, my hand slipped, brushing against his. It was nothing. A fleeting, accidental contact. Skin on skin for less than a second. But it felt like a brand. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, fizzing in my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. His skin was warm, calloused, and real. So incredibly real. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. My face was on fire. I couldn't look at him. I just stared at the crate, my heart doing a wild, panicked dance. Did he feel that? He must have. Does he think I'm a freak? The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "There you go," he said, his voice completely even. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his pants. If he'd noticed, he gave no sign. Or he was a better actor than I was. That single, meaningless touch rewired my entire apartment. Suddenly, I was intensely aware of him, of the space he occupied. The air was charged with his presence. When he sat on the couch, I felt the dip in the cushions from across the room. When he breathed, I felt I could hear the rasp in his lungs. My sanctuary had become a cage, and I was trapped in it with this man who, with a simple brush of his hand, had set my entire nervous system on fire. The next day, the dynamic shifted in a way I never could have predicted. I was at my bench, trying to work, but my focus was shattered. I kept replaying that moment. The touch. The heat. I was trying to use my finishing press, an old, beautiful cast-iron thing from the 1920s. It was my favorite tool, a relic that had served bookbinders for a century. I twisted the handle to apply pressure to a newly glued spine, and then I heard it. A faint, sickening crack. The handle went limp in my hand. The pressure was gone. I stared at it in horror. A small, crucial metal gear inside the mechanism had sheared in two. A clean break. No, you whispered. No. This wasn't a tool you could just buy a part for at the hardware store. It was obsolete. Finding a replacement would mean scouring specialty forums, maybe paying a fortune to have one custom machined. It would take weeks, months. My work would grind to a halt. A wave of cold, professional despair washed over me. I must have made a small, choked gasp of frustration because suddenly he was there, standing beside my bench. "Everything okay?" Julian asked. "It's broken," I said, my voice flat with defeat. "My press." A gear inside just snapped. He leaned over, his arm brushing my shoulder. Another jolt. I flinched, trying to disguise it as a shift in my stool. He peered into the complex guts of the machine. I expected him to offer a useless platitude. "That's a shame," or "Hope you can fix it." Instead, he said, "Let me see." He gently moved me aside, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he examined the broken pieces. He turned them over, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had the focus of a surgeon. "It's cast iron," he said, thinking aloud. "Too brittle to weld properly. It'd just crack again." He looked around my workshop, his eyes cataloging my tools, my materials. "What's the tensile strength you need here?" "It's a pressure screw, so it's mostly compression." I was stunned into silence. He was speaking a language of physics and materials I barely understood. I don't know," I stammered. He picked up a small block of dense, dark wood from my scrap pile. "Lignum vitae, one of the hardest woods in the world." "This might work," he said, "as a temporary fix. If we can shape it right for the next hour." He took over. He wasn't the clumsy giant I feared. He was a craftsman. He used my own files and saws with a precision that was breathtaking. And he needed my help. "Hold this," he'd say. "Steady." Right there, I became his assistant. My knowledge of the press, of how the parts were supposed to fit, was essential. His knowledge of materials and mechanics was what brought the idea to life. We worked side by side, our shoulders sometimes touching, our hands working in concert. The hierarchy of host and guest, of quiet scholar and loud laborer, dissolved. We were just two men trying to fix something broken. He carved a new gear from the block of wood, filing each tooth by hand, checking the fit again and again. It was a slow, meditative process. The only sounds were the rasp of the file against the wood and our shared breathing. When it was done, it was a perfect replica, a small, dark, wooden miracle. He fitted it into the press. "Okay," he said, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Give it a try. Easy, though." I held my breath and turned the handle. It caught. It turned smoothly. The press engaged, applying gentle, even pressure. It worked. A laugh escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief and wonder. "It works," I said, looking at him. "How did you do that?" He shrugged, a faint, proud smile touching his lips. "I fix things too," he said. Just bigger things in that moment. Looking at him, covered in a fine layer of my workshop's dust, a smudge of wood stain on his cheek, he wasn't a stranger or a threat. He was a collaborator, a savior, and he was standing in the center of my world, putting it back together. The ground beneath my feet, which had felt so solid for so long, had shifted into something new and terrifying and full of impossible hope. The second night was different. The awkwardness had been sanded away by our shared project, leaving behind a smoother, more comfortable silence. We ate dinner sitting on the floor, plates balanced on a stack of art books. We talked. He told me about the things he built, custom cabinets, intricate staircases, entire houses from the ground up. He spoke of it like I spoke of paper, with a reverence for its grain, its strength, its history. I told him about the books I was working on. A first edition of Frankenstein with a broken spine. A family Bible from the 1800s, its pages crumbling from acid decay. He listened, really listened, asking questions that showed he was not just hearing the words, but understanding the passion behind them. Then the storm hit. It came on suddenly, a furious assault of wind and rain against my windows. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the apartment into a profound, disorienting darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The only sound was the howling wind and the torrential rain. "Stay put." Julian's voice came out of the blackness, calm and steady. A moment later, there was the scratch of a match, and a tiny, brave flame bloomed. He lit a candle I kept on the mantelpiece, then another. The room reemerged in pieces, a landscape of flickering shadows. The shelves of books looked like ancient cliffs. My tools cast long, distorted shapes on the walls. The world outside had vanished. Everything had shrunk to this single, candlelit room, to just the two of us. The pretense of normal life was gone. There was no television to watch, no phones to scroll through, no work to be done. There was only the storm and the candlelight and the man sitting 5 feet away from me. I hate storms, I admitted, my voice sounding small in the suddenly intimate space. Yeah, he asked. He'd settled back on the couch, one arm draped over the back, looking completely at ease. The candlelight carved his face into angles of light and shadow, making him look like a statue from some forgotten, heroic age. My father used to say the thunder was God getting angry. I said, a memory I hadn't dredged up in years. It used to scare me to death. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my dad left during a storm, just packed a bag and walked out into the rain. I was 7. For a long time, I thought he'd just get washed away. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. It was a piece of his past, a shard of brokenness he was just offering me. The confident man, the capable builder, had once been a small boy, afraid of the rain. I am sorry, he whispered. It was a long time ago, he said, but his eyes were distant, lost in that memory. It's funny. I've spent my whole life building houses, strong houses, places that are supposed to keep the storm out. But I've never really had one of my own. Not really, just a series of apartments, boxes to keep my stuff in until the next job. He looked around my apartment at the controlled, curated chaos of my life's work. Then I'd see you, he said, his voice dropping lower. Through the windows sometimes, when I'd get home late. You'd be at your bench with that little lamp on. So focused. You looked rooted, like you belonged right here. My heart stuttered. He'd seen me? He'd thought of me? I envied it, he admitted. I thought you probably hated me. The noise I make. Stomping around at all hours, no. I said, the word rushing out of me on a wave of adrenaline. I didn't hate you. I was intimidated. He actually chuckled, a low, soft sound. Intimidated? Of me? I'm just a guy with a hammer. You're not, I said, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed. You walk into a room and you fill it. I spend my life trying to be invisible. You're the opposite of that. It felt like I was a ghost, and you were the only solid thing in the hallway. The space between us was electric. The storm outside was a distant roar, the world beyond my windows ceasing to exist. There was only the flickering light, his shadowed face, and the truth finally spoken aloud. He uncoiled himself from the couch and moved to sit on the floor, closer to me. He rested his back against the sofa, our shoulders now only inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating from him. I could smell the faint scent of my own soap on his skin. A ghost, he repeated softly, testing the word. I feel like that sometimes. Like I'm just passing through everyone's life, building their homes, but never having one of my own. He turned his head to look at me, and his eyes in the candlelight were deep and serious. I haven't felt very solid lately, Leo. Until I ended up in here, my breath hitched. He said my name. He'd said it before, but this time it felt different. It felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. He lifted his hand, the one with the scar knuckles, the one that had fixed my press, the one that had brushed against mine and set me on fire. He moved it slowly, deliberately, giving me every chance to pull away. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was hesitant, questioning. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every cell in my body was screaming, a chorus of fear and want that was deafening. I leaned into his touch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. It was all the answer he needed. He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the space between our lips. The kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was a discovery. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly honest. It tasted of rain and candlelight and years of unspoken loneliness. His lips were soft, a startling contrast to the rough texture of his thumb on my skin. It was a kiss that felt like a confession, a question, and an answer all at once. It was the end of the world I knew, and the beginning of one I had never dared to imagine. I woke with a start. Sunlight was streaming through the window, bright and unforgiving. The storm had passed. The power was back on. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I was on the sofa, a blanket tucked around me. I had a vague, dreamlike memory of him carrying me there from the floor, of him whispering something I couldn't quite catch before he retreated to the pile of blankets I'd set out for him. But the pile of blankets was empty, neatly folded. He was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed me in the gut. I sat up, my heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm against my ribs. My eyes scanned the room. His duffel bag was gone. The towel he used was gone. It was as if he'd never been here at all, except for the note. It was a single piece of paper torn from my own notepad, sitting on the coffee table. His handwriting was a strong, masculine script, all sharp angles and clean lines. For words, "My place is fine. Thanks." That was it. No mention of the night before. No mention of the storm, the confession, the kiss. Just a polite, dismissive thank you note. The kind a stranger leaves. The air rushed out of my lungs. The hope that had bloomed in my chest, so fragile and new, withered and died in an instant. It was a mistake. Of course, it was a mistake. He was lonely, displaced, caught up in the strange intimacy of the storm. It was a fluke, an aberration, and in the clear light of morning, he regretted it. He'd run. He'd fled back to his own space, putting the wall of the hallway back between us. A chasm of shame and self-recrimination opened up inside me. Stupid. You're so stupid, Leo. You let him in. You let down your guard for one single moment, and this is what happens. Rejection. Cold and absolute. He took what he needed, shelter, a moment of connection, and then he left. I crumpled the note in my fist, the sharp edges of the paper digging into my palm. The silence of my apartment, once my greatest comfort, now felt like a punishment. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the absence of him. The air no longer smelled of sawdust and rain. It just smelled of my own solitude. My fortress was a prison again, and I had handed him the key, only for him to toss it aside on his way out the door. The next 24 hours were a special kind of hell. Every sound in the building was him. A door closing down the hall was him, leaving for good. The elevator dinging was him, coming back to apologize. The creak of the floorboards above was the ghost of his footsteps in my own apartment. I was haunted. I tried to work. I sat at my bench and stared at the pages of the book I was mending. The words blurred. My hands, usually so steady, trembled. I kept looking at the finishing press, at the dark wooden gear he had so carefully carved. It felt like a mockery now, a monument to a brief, illusory connection. My solitude, once a source of strength, was now tainted. It was no longer a chosen state of being. It was a condition imposed upon me. It was an absence. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. The apartment he had filled with his presence now felt cavernous and cold. I was more alone than I had been before he ever knocked on my door. I saw him once. I had to leave to get groceries, a journey I'd put off as long as possible. As I locked my door, his opened. We stood there at opposite ends of the hallway, the scene of our first awkward encounters. He looked tired. He hadn't shaved. He just stood there, his keys in his hand, and looked at me. His green eyes were unreadable, shuttered. The warmth I'd seen in them in the candlelight was gone, replaced by a guarded distance that was more painful than any anger could have been. I waited for him to say something. Anything. An apology. An explanation. Even a cruel dismissal would be better than this crushing silence. He just gave a tight, jerky nod, the kind of dismissive gesture you give a stranger you pass on the street. Then he turned and walked to the elevator, his back ramrod straight. He didn't look back. The elevator doors slid shut, and I was left standing in the hallway, my heart feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. That was it then. The recoil was complete. The door was closed. The brief, beautiful thaw was over, and the winter had returned, colder and harsher than before. I went back inside my apartment and didn't come out for another 2 days. On the third night, I gave up. I accepted it. It was a moment, a beautiful, strange, storm-fueled moment that meant everything to me and nothing to him. I had to let it go. I had to rebuild my walls stronger this time and forget the feeling of his hand on my cheek, the taste of his lips. I had to go back to being the ghost in apartment 4A. I was making tea, preparing to settle in for another long, empty night of reading when the knock came. It wasn't a loud, demanding knock. It was soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the kettle whistling, screaming into the silence. I told myself it was Mr. Henderson, or a delivery. Anyone but him. Another knock, just as soft. Slowly, as if walking through water, I moved to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to rip the bandage off. I opened the door. It was him, Julian. He looked wrecked. His hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it for days. There were dark circles under his eyes, deeper than before. He was wearing the same clothes he'd worn in the hallway 2 days ago. He looked lost. All the confidence, all the carefully constructed strength was gone. He just looked vulnerable. He didn't say anything. He just stood there on my doorstep, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you want?" I asked, and I was horrified to hear the tremor in my own voice. I had wanted to sound cold and different. Instead, I just sounded hurt. He didn't wait for an invitation this time. He took a single step forward, crossing the threshold into my apartment, into my space. He closed the door behind him, and the soft click of the latch sounded like a final, irrevocable judgment. "I'm an idiot," he said, his voice raw. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, at his own worn-out work boots. "I'm a coward." I just stood there, my arms crossed over my chest, a feeble attempt to hold myself together. "Your note was very clear," I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I didn't feel. All I felt was a tidal wave of confusion and a desperate, stupid flicker of hope. "The note was a lie," he said, finally looking up at me. His eyes were pleading. "Leo," I panicked. I woke up that morning, and the sun was out, and everything was real. What happened between us? It was real, and it scared the hell out of me. He took a step closer. I held my ground. "My whole life," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm the one who's in control. I build things. I fix things. I know how the pieces fit together. But with you, I don't know anything. I'm not in control. The way I felt that night, sitting with you in the dark. I have never felt anything like that before. And it terrified me, so you ran," I said, the accusation hanging in the air. "So I ran," he confirmed, his voice cracking. "I thought if I just went back to my own apartment, put everything back where it belonged, it would go away. That I could just forget it. Pretend it didn't happen." He gestured helplessly around my apartment. "But it's worse. Being over there in that empty box. Knowing you were right here. Leo, these last 3 days have been the longest of my life." The silence was. I couldn't stand it. "I thought you hated me. I thought you regretted it. That I'd forced myself on you. That you were just being kind to the pathetic, flooded-out neighbor, his fear. It was a mirror of my own. All my anxieties, all my self-recrimination, he was saying them back to me. We had both been cowering in our separate rooms, convinced we were the one who had been rejected. The absurdity of it, the tragedy of it, broke through my anger. "You thought I rejected you?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "Julian, you left a forward note and then looked at me in the hallway like I was a piece of furniture." The silence has been torture. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was like watching the sun rise. "Then you—" "Yes," I said, the word a ragged exhale. "God, yes." He closed the remaining distance between us in a single stride. He didn't kiss me. He just rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. He breathed in a long, shuddering breath, as if he'd been holding it for 3 days. I could feel the trembling in his body. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I lifted my hands and placed them on his chest. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a rhythm that matched my own. The walls I had so desperately tried to rebuild came crumbling down, and this time I didn't care. He pulled back slightly and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object and pressed it into my palm. It was a bird carved from a piece of dark wood, the same wood he'd used to fix my press. It was exquisite. Every feather was detailed. Its head was cocked in a curious expression. It was smooth and warm from being in his pocket. "I couldn't work," he said, his eyes fixed on the small carving in my hand. "I couldn't sleep. I just made this. I don't know why." I closed my fingers around it, the smooth would a comfort against my skin. It was a tangible apology, a peace offering. Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out his keys. He fumbled with the ring for a moment before sliding a single, shiny key off it. He held out to me, his hand shaking slightly. It was the key to his apartment. "My place is fixed," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I don't want to be there. I'd rather be here, with you, if you'll have me." It wasn't a question about the couch anymore. It was a question about everything. It was a symbolic gesture, so profound it stole the breath from my lungs. He wasn't just offering me access to his apartment. He was offering me access to his life. He was giving me the key. I looked from the key in his outstretched hand to his face, at the hope and fear warring in his eyes. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink. I didn't retreat into the safety of my fortress. I took the key. The mornings are different now. They start not with the silence of my solitary routine, but with the soft sound of his breathing next to me. I wake up to the warmth of his body, the solid weight of his arm draped over my waist. The first thing I see isn't a book I fell asleep reading, but the line of his jaw, the faint stubble there, the scar at his temple. Our apartment. And it is our apartment now, his things slowly, carefully migrating across the hall. Smells different. It's a blend of old paper and fresh sawdust, of my tea and his strong, black coffee. It's the scent of two separate worlds, two different lives that have merged into one. There's an easy, comfortable domesticity that I never knew I was missing. We make breakfast together, a clumsy dance in my small kitchen. He reads on the sofa while I work at my bench, the quiet between us no longer tense or empty, but full and companionable. He'll watch me for a while, his head propped on his hand, with a small, soft smile on his face that still makes my heart skip a beat. Sometimes, I'll find him running his calloused fingers over the tooling on an old leather spine, his expression one of quiet reverence. And sometimes he'll bring home a piece of strangely shaped wood, a burl or a knot, and ask me what story I think is trapped inside it. We are learning each other's languages. There is no more anxiety. There is no fear of the morning after. There is just the morning and the promise of the day after that. Sleeping in the same bed, which at first felt like a terrifying act of vulnerability, has become the safest place in the world. It's where he tells me about his childhood, and I tell him about my fears. It's where the strong, silent man and the quiet, hidden man can simply be. I look back at the man I was a year ago, the one who lived in a fortress of his own making, and I barely recognize him. My life was ordered, yes. It was safe, but it was a grayscale existence. I was preserving stories, but I wasn't living one. Julian wasn't a disruption to my routine. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the chaotic, unexpected, terrifying, and beautiful chapter that made the entire book make sense. He didn't just breach my walls. He showed me the sky. Last night, a storm rolled in, the first one since that night. The thunder rattled the windows, and the lights flickered. For a second, a ghost of the old fear pricked at me. Then I felt his hand find mine in the dark. His grip was warm and steady. "It's just noise," he whispered, his voice a low rumble beside me. "We're safe in here." And I knew he was right. I wasn't a boy afraid of his father's anger anymore. I was a man in a home he had built not with paper and glue, but with courage and a terrifying, wonderful yes. I had found my story not on a dusty shelf, but in the arms of the stranger from across the hall. The love I never knew how to look for hadn't been found. It had been built piece by careful piece, right here in the heart of the storm.